Well, what is going on? My name's Des and welcome back to the VivoActive 3 review series, and yes, we are finally going to get to those activities. Now, I know you've been waiting a while for this video, but let me explain why it took so long. Most fitness trackers need up to a week to learn your patterns to not only produce accurate heart rate results, but running results as well. I'll touch on that here in just a little bit. But also, this was a pretty big list of activities to go through, and although I did not get to water sports or snow sports, which I guess technically are kind of the same thing, I did manage to test nearly everything else, not only once, but numerous times, just so I could learn the nuances and try to be as scientific as possible. So with that being said, I may not be the quickest out with the review, but the one thing I can promise you is I'm going to be as thorough as possible, providing a lot of detail, and hopefully I won't bore you to death. So a couple notes before diving in. In regards to how I gauged accuracy, I used quite a few different devices to compare against. The Fenix 5X, which is my baseline device that I use all day, every day, the Edge 520 for cycling, an Oregon 750, as well as an iPhone with Strava, and even the new Apple Watch Series 3, which I am also reviewing concurrently. And for settings for running and cycling, I have autopause enabled and use GPS plus GLONASS. It doesn't have UltraTrack, so that isn't an issue. So first, let's start with outdoor and indoor running and walking. For outside running, it did fairly well for distance and speed, and auto-stopped and started about the same time as my Fenix 5X. Heart rate was pretty accurate compared to a heart rate strap, and was also pretty much right on with the Fenix 5X wrist-based heart rate as well. Latency was to be expected, but wasn't bad as it took maybe 5 seconds to pick up a drastic change in heart rate as well as speed. GPS was pretty solid in nearly every situation I tried, with a little bit of slight variance, but I did try it out in the wide open, in the woods, and even near buildings, but it was very similar to the Fenix 5X. Elevation is fairly accurate with the barometric altimeter for running, as well as walking, trail running, and hiking, but seemed to be just slightly lower than all my other test devices. For the treadmill, I actually did a couple treadmill runs first before an outside run, and the results were pretty off compared with the Fenix 5X, which was previously calibrated with the treadmill. But then I ran outside once, and after just that one single run, the treadmill results became much more in line with the Fenix 5X. With indoor track, this was pretty darn accurate, especially compared to the treadmill. I did 8 laps around a very short indoor track with 16 laps, equaling a mile, and it was pretty much spot on. I have a rather long stride compared to most folks, so indoor running activities with pretty much all wearables garners a slightly lower distance calculation for me personally. But I have found that if I shorten my stride, the distance becomes much more in line. Really good stuff overall, and it also provides running dynamics like cadence and stride length. And by the way, indoor track and treadmill are not interchangeable. For walking, I already covered that earlier with running, but it does fairly well with some slight variance, but nothing drastic by any means. For walking indoors, again, just like the indoor track activity, I was extremely pleased with the results. I did find that if you're casually walking, it's a lot more accurate, but if you're briskly walking with a slightly longer stride, it can produce a slightly lower than actual distance result. Just note that walk indoors is different than indoor track, where indoor track collects and shows running dynamics, where walk indoors does not. And now on to cycling. For road riding, distance and speed were very accurate, and heart rate was surprisingly accurate compared to the chest heart rate strap, with only a slight variance and also quite close to the Fenix 5X. Everything else was pretty much good to go, except for that elevation was slightly lower than nearly all my test devices, as well as Strava. For mountain biking, distance was a little bit less accurate, but still fairly close, and speed was right in line. I tested this in both wide open spaces as well as dense tree-covered areas, and GPS sensitivity was perfectly in line with my test devices, as it auto-paused at nearly the exact same time with all of them. Once again, elevation was slightly lower, and just like almost all activities, Strava will be slightly higher if you use your iPhone or go in and correct elevation in Strava Desktop. For biking indoors, it paired perfectly fine with the Garmin speed and cadence sensor. The VivoActive 3 was actually shockingly accurate, but I did find it interesting that the Fenix 5X and VivoActive 3 calculated calories a little bit differently. Next up is floor climb, which is actually different than Stair Stepper, as this one's actually intended for actual stair climbing and shows the floors climbed as a data field. I tested this both in a narrow stairwell in my house as well as at the gym, where there is a lot of open space, and unfortunately in both situations, the floor count was pretty off. In both situations, I climbed the floor 10 times. At home, I had 14 steps per floor, and at the gym, it was 20 steps per floor. The VivoActive 3 didn't exactly do well in either situation. But the interesting thing is that in the wide open stairwell, the Fenix did very well in tracking the floors, while it did very poorly in the narrow one. So unfortunately, the one piece of data that matters with this activity, the number of floors climbed, was just not that accurate. An interesting thing to note is that the minimum and maximum elevation figures were exactly the same, and in the gym situation, it had nearly 3 times the amount of descent than ascent. It's definitely very odd, but all barometric altimeters will definitely suffer indoors, so this is definitely not exclusive to the VivoActive 3 nor Garmin. With strength training, as many people have reported, automatic rep counting is kind of hit and miss. Some movements produce extremely accurate results where some others did not. For movements that were very accurate, these would include the big names like bench press, bicep curls, tricep pull downs, lateral raises, and vertical shoulder presses. It also does well in tracking squat and lunge reps, but thinks that lunges are squats. But where it suffered was with flies, both cable and dumbbell, reverse flies, both cable and dumbbell as well as overhead triceps and any movement that doesn't involve limb movement, such as push-ups and pull-ups. You do have to be very deliberate with your movements to ensure an accurate result, and it may sound weird, but swinging your arms slightly before starting your set can actually activate the movement sensor for a little bit more accurate rep count. On a few occasions, it just kind of forgot to start counting reps. But the nice thing about the touchscreen interface is that it is super handy to edit your reps and found it much more convenient than the physical buttons of the Fenix. I'll have a very comprehensive breakdown of strength training with the VivoActive, Forerunner 935, as well as Fenixes that I'm filming literally right after this one, and it should be out in just a couple days, and once it's out, I'll have the video link right here. The cardio activity is probably going to be the best for generalized activities like boot camp classes, aerobics, wait, do they use that term anymore? Or basically anything else inside the gym that doesn't already have a pre-built activity. For yoga, your results will vary whether you're doing a power flow, alignment, or even yin type class. But the one thing I can say is that wearing any watch in general can be a little bit annoying when you're doing movements that involve a lot of wrist flexion, like crow. Plus, if you have a button closest to your wrist, you can most definitely accidentally press it if your hand is at a 90-degree angle. The elliptical activity comes stock with just the calories data field, but unfortunately you can't add a steps field which could correlate with the strides, since that's what's actually shown on a lot of ellipticals. At the end of your workout, you can view your heart rate range and zones along with the calories burned, but no distance or speed. The Stair Stepper or stair mill activity again only comes stock with just the calories field but no ability for a steps field. You won't be registering any floors climb with the Stair Stepper since there's no actual elevation gain. If you want to be registering steps, you definitely want to try to avoid placing your hands on the side or the front of the stair mill and just use your legs if your balance is okay enough. Plus, you'll get the best bang for your buck if you don't use the handrails. For rowing indoors, first of all, I got called out for some really bad rowing technique, but I'm definitely working on it, but I do appreciate the feedback. But in terms of the results, it's scary accurate for stroke totals as well as the stroke per minute. Not surprising by any means, but it is right on. Heart rate was also surprisingly good for an activity that does involve a little bit of wrist flexion. And to start to wrap it all up, manual lap functionality is coming in a future firmware release. But as of right now, it only laps on predefined intervals of 1 mile for running and 5 miles for cycling. Swimming is the only exception where you can press the single button to register a lap. Unfortunately, like I said earlier, there were just a few activities I cannot test right now due to the weather, but I will definitely test those in a follow-up video. But you definitely will not be seeing me test gymnastic or martial arts, so don't get your hopes up. So in the final episode, I'll wrap things up by going over some of the smartwatch capabilities, what I experienced with battery life, answer some FAQs, as well as provide some tips and tricks on getting the most out of this device. But maybe most importantly, I'll have a verdict on what's good, what's not so good, who this watch is actually intended for, as well as who it isn't for, but I promise it won't take a week for that episode to come out. So thanks again for watching, and we'll see you soon.